Hi, everybody, and welcome to another exciting edition of Quick Hits with BDSA. We have our favorite person from BDSA, Kelly Nielsen, who is the Vice President of Insights and Analytics. Good afternoon, Kelly. How are you today?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much again for having me.
So this week we want to talk about stoners. This has been a pretty hot topic. Why don't you start off with kind of what you're seeing on the data side of things?
Yeah, I think if we go back in time, the term stoner has a lot of derogatory connotations, but as we really start digging into our consumer insights data, we're beginning to see that, so many cannabis consumers technically fit that definition when we really start to dig into the frequency and amount of cannabis that folks are consuming. And as you can see, it's not all a whole bunch of folks that aren't functioning in society.
Stoner, I'm a stoner.
Exactly.
So what defines that term stoner? Is it the frequency of consumption?
Yeah, when we take a look at it, we take a look specifically at the frequency of consumption. So how often are folks consuming cannabis, and how prevalent is it throughout the day? Are really, I think, the two big measures that we tend to look at, in addition to just like how much of it are folks consuming.
What is too much? haven't hit that number yet.
Each their own. To each their own. I think as time goes on, tolerance levels increase. So I think anyone listening here probably knows that 5 milligrams, 10 milligrams, 20 milligrams, it doesn't matter. It affects us all a little bit differently depending on our experiences.
It reminds me of whenever you go to the doctor for your annual checkup, they ask you how much alcohol you consume, and it's like anything above like 3 to 5 drinks a week, like you're like at risk of being an alcoholic. Like, I don't know, that's like 3 to 5 drinks a night. Yeah. But 3 to 5 drinks a week. I mean, most of us want to have a beer or two, or a scotch or two at the end of the day, or a glass of wine. It is very relative and based on consumption. It's also, I think, that term stoner kind of was moniker kind of labeled at this kind of lost generation that I'm part of, Gen Xers, that, were consuming cannabis, or people that wanted to maybe live a little bit of an alternative lifestyle that weren't as industrious as they were expected to be. But yeah, I mean, it's if you're able to, manage your control, your use, and it's not problematic, or you're using it more than you should, it's not causing harm in your life, it's actually causing benefit, especially with cannabis. I think that's a very, kind of slippery slope, that term stoner, at least where it's come from.
Yeah, I mean, I recall just a couple of years ago, I live in Chicago, right? I live in Illinois, so adult use legal for about a little over 18, 20 months or so. And I distinctly remember probably 2-3 years ago having a conversation with a prior coworker who, made the comment that why is it socially acceptable to have a whole bottle of wine on a work night, but not get a little high before bed?
Yeah, exactly. So, talking about the sales data and, talking about the frequency of use, I mean, how much of, the total sales are kind of to this kind of category of frequent user? I mean, we wrote a story about it in MJ Brain Insights that this is the butter we put on our bread in our industry. The people are spending in $100, $200 a week on cannabis, not maybe having the occasional $10 or $20 purchase.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. But I think that a lot of the low dose and micro dose products get a lot of press these days, and they have a need state, right? There's definitely a time and a place for those types of products. But I don't think we can disregard the high potency types of products. And so, I think one of my favorite stories that we've talked with recently is actually with Keef Cola. Reminder, Keef Brands is the #1 beverage in the entire country. And if you take a look at the top 6 products that they sell, 4 of them are 100 milligram products, while 2 of them are 10 milligram products. And I think when I think about portfolio brand strategy, it's important to invite everyone to the table and make sure that you have a little bit of something for everyone. But when it comes to where a majority of the dollars are coming from and who's spending those dollars, it really is your high potency, high frequency users. They're going through product quicker, and it's a more habitual part of their lives.
Habitual routine, right? We I think most of us in society, do some self-medicating to kind of deal with the stresses and suffering of humanity, right? On we go. And so, with that kind of heavier basket size, I mean, the stoner model or kind of mentality or kind of moniker, as I said before, kind of it creates this image of somebody who's frequently smoking flower. Yep. And are we seeing that, these heavier consumers are kind of exploring all these different categories?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple things at play there. I think the first is that we do see that the highest frequency of use still is inhalable products. So folks that are using inhalables are, 62% of them are likely to be using at least daily, if not multiple times a day. Mm-hmm. But I think the key here is that we see so much cross usage of categories these days that it's not just inhalables where we're seeing that. Folks that prefer edibles or folks that are consuming edibles, 40% of them are also consuming at least daily. 2/3 of them are consuming at least weekly. So it's not just your inhalable consumers, and we see a great deal of cross-category usage. People are getting more sophisticated, and they're able to choose products based on what it is that they're trying to do and how they want to feel.
Yeah. I mean, there's been big trends in certainly Silicon Valley about, microdosing psilocybin to kind of get that creative edge. And, I think, microdosing has certainly been a big popular, form of use in the cannabis industry for that, frequent user. I've always enjoyed, kind of my 2.5 milligram moxie mints throughout the day over a period of time. And, but going back to like kind of this category expansion, we're seeing new products coming out there, like, the kind of the energy shots where they're cannabis shots. We've got, the Mio style drink that Curaleaf came out with that you can just add to bottles of water. Obviously the beverage categories, a really strong interest. So, as we start seeing these other product categories, it's almost that seems like that's kind of like chasing that holy grail, or this kind of quest for the holy grail of like converting these Chardonnay moms or other persona types, or business executives, men and women that might want to use cannabis. Are we kind of trying to create too many products to cater to a market that doesn't really spend that much money?
I mean, I venture to say that folks that are using cannabis, and especially those heavy users, are they're spending a lot of big bucks, and there is always something to be said for category expansion. There's always something to be said for getting another new user in, and I think there's something to be said for when we talk about edibles a lot. If we go back in time a year or two, we always talk about edibles as like an entryway into the cannabis space because it's more easily accessible than say flower or vaping or things like that. But I think the reality is where so much of the volume is coming from. It's almost the other way, that a lot of that volume, over 70% of inhalable users are also using edibles, right? And they're also using other product forms. And so regardless of kind of product form, I think it's the most frequent users that are really purchasing cross-category in a lot of extensive ways. And I think an interesting analysis we conducted recently that I thought was really interesting was actually looking specifically at beverages, because beverages obviously huge growth in this industry, like we've talked about in the past. And I think, but what's really interesting about beverages is if you look at beverage consumers, the percentage of folks that actually prefer beverages relatively small. The folks that are using beverages still relatively small compared to kind of like the broader edible category or inhalable category. But beverage consumers are among the most dedicated consumers to the overall cannabis industry, and they are more likely to also cross-consume with other categories. And I bring that up because I think that's a really good example of really frequent consumers looking for different product forms. So they're not always using the same form or ingesting cannabis in the same way. They're looking for different products based on the need state, based on the occasion, based on who they're around, to figure out how they can fit cannabis into a broader range of occasions. I think the other thing, just like calling out usage, that I want to, make sure is brought out here, because, we've been talking about like daily usage and what that means, because, people might hear that and think, well, yeah, like, people have turned cannabis into a habitual thing to help them sleep, for example. But I want to call out that it's not just in the evening to help sleep, right? Like, yes, the evening tends to be the most common time of day when folks might be using cannabis. But at the same time, we're seeing that it truly is an all day sort of situation. 30% of consumers are still telling us that they're consuming in the morning. An additional 30% are telling us they're consuming in the late morning. And so, wake and bake is still a thing too. And I think that can cross.
Like second breakfast, like you're having your second wake and bake in the morning. That's pretty cool. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and and as you mentioned at the very onset, I mean, everybody's kind of got their own bodies and understands their own bodies well enough to know what is going to make them feel good, and how functional they can be during those time periods. And and I've been in positions at companies where you kind of need to kind of balance the amount of cannabis use during the daytime with the ability to do your job and function and everything else. And I think most people in this industry recognize that you can do both.
Yep. Well, it's funny you say that, because I think just the past year, as we started this conversation talking about, going to a doctor and talking about the number of drinks that you have during the week, and does that make you an alcoholic, right? So I've been with BDSA going on a year, and it's definitely enlightened me into far more widespread knowledge of the cannabis industry, the cannabis consumer. And, I have my first physical coming up the next couple of weeks, and I have to figure out how to talk to my doctor about cannabis usage. And it's definitely an evolving industry there.
It's such an interesting point. I mean, back in 2015, I was talking to my doctor about what I do and about cannabis, and I asked her, did she ever look to prescribe cannabis? I almost talked to every single doctor I've ever visited with about kind of where they feel about cannabis, because I think it's really interesting. And back then it was her biggest challenge as a physician was, I mean, she obviously wants to help people. She knows that cannabis is beneficial. She just didn't understand how to prescribe it to a customer. She doesn't understand the vast array of products and strains and percentages and everything else to really be able to dial it in. I think as we continue to advance research in our industry, that will be a big factor into that. Thanks for people like Sue Sisley, Dr. Sue Sisley, and others that are doing some of this great research. And we can really kind of dial in the cannabinoids to the treatments that we can, create some benefit to society and to human health.
And I think that's a really great point. And just to, kind of bringing this full circle back to this idea of frequent consumption, frequent usage, because when it comes to prescription users, they are probably among some of those that, really fall into really habitual usage for health purposes and whatnot. And I was talking with a client recently, and the question was brought up, or the statement was made, I don't care about the medical consumer. I care only about the recreation consumer. And the reality is there is no differentiation. 70% of medical consumers also claim to be purchased or using cannabis for recreational purposes, and vice versa. That even if you don't have a med card, but you are in a fully legal state, there is an absolute degree of health and wellness, which is why it falls into this habitual usage, that folks know how to take gummies, they know how to smoke something to help them relax, they drink tea on a regular basis, that they're used to incorporating different products for an overall health and wellness.
There's not any medical alcohol users, and there's not any recreational opioid, category that's I mean, there are obviously people that use typical stuff that is for medical, for recreational purposes, off label, but I mean, it's a really good point. There is kind of this, kind of bridge that, people are using cannabis. It has medical benefits. So whether you're using it as a recreational user, you're still using it to create that medical and wellness impact on your life. So kind of wrapping everything up here. I always love having our conversations. Kelly, thank you so much for your time again today. What is the message to everybody? Is it everybody should go out and get a t-shirt that says I'm a stoner?
I think the big overarching thesis here is that a strong majority of the cannabis consumers, those that are driving the industry, probably fall into a stoner stereotype by definition of frequency and consumption of use. And so why is the phrase, or why is the term still considered a dirty term or have such a negative connotation when we know that cannabis usage is spending all demographics and, all different aspects of our society. So I think let's destigmatize it.
I agree. All right. So everybody go out, tell your neighbors, tell your friends to be a stoner. It's now cool. It's no longer negative. It's no longer a bad word, negative stigma to it. And once again, of course, Kelly, thank you. And thank you to the entire BDSA team for the incredible market research and consumer insights you provide to our industry. And we look forward to seeing you at MJ Unpacked next month.
Cannot wait.